Blocked from boarding her flight, Linda Grayson finds herself under intense scrutiny, judged solely by her appearance. But when the truth about her identity comes to light, the airline staff is stunned. What happens next might surprise you. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe. Linda Grayson, a kind-hearted philanthropist, walked into the bustling airport terminal. Dressed in practical khaki pants, a sun-faded shirt, and sturdy hiking boots still caked with mud, she carried a modest duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her heart swelled with fulfillment as she thought about the weeks she'd spent volunteering in a small Midwestern town, devastated by a historic flood. Despite the satisfaction of helping rebuild homes and distributing essential supplies, Linda felt a longing for her own home. The idea of sleeping in her own bed and enjoying a cup of tea on her porch brought a warm smile to her face. But as she approached the check-in counter, that smile faded. The airline staff's glances were sharp, scrutinizing her appearance as though she didn't belong. Linda kept her demeanor calm and polite. "Good afternoon," she greeted the young woman behind the counter, her voice gentle. The agent's eyes flicked over Linda's muddy boots and sunburned face before returning to the computer screen. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, her tone clipped and formal. "Yes, I'd like to check in for my flight," Linda replied, sliding her passport and a slightly crumpled first-class ticket across the counter. The agent's eyebrows shot up as she scanned the ticket. Her gaze shifted to Linda, disbelief evident in her expression. "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is first class," she said, her voice tinged with doubt. Linda offered a patient smile. "I'm certain. That's my ticket." The woman hesitated, clearly unsettled by the contrast between Linda's weathered appearance and her high-class travel accommodations. As she scanned the boarding pass, the machine beeped in confirmation, but the agent's skepticism lingered. "I'll need to verify something," the agent said curtly, disappearing to consult with a colleague. Linda waited, aware of the curious stares from other passengers nearby. When the agent returned, her demeanor had shifted slightly, but she still looked uneasy. "Everything seems in order," she said stiffly, handing back Linda's documents. Linda accepted them with a gracious nod. "Thank you. And for what it's worth, I understand your initial reaction. It's a good reminder for all of us not to judge by appearances." The agent's face flushed as she nodded mutely, clearly embarrassed. Linda walked toward the security line, her step steady despite the subtle sting of the encounter. She'd faced moments like this before, moments where people's assumptions got the better of them. But she didn't let it cloud her heart. Instead, she focused on the bigger picture, the families she'd helped, the smiles she'd seen. Those memories carried her through. As Linda approached the security checkpoint, she noticed the officers exchanging subtle glances. Her outfit, a simple shirt, khaki pants, and boots, stood out among the polished business travelers and impeccably dressed tourists around her. She could feel their eyes on her, their assumptions palpable. She placed her duffel bag on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector. A sharp beep sounded, and one of the security officers, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'll need you to step aside for additional screening," he said, his tone leaving no room for objection. Linda complied without hesitation. "Of course," she said, her voice steady. The officer motioned her toward a side area. "Can you explain the purpose of your travel today?" he asked. Linda smiled softly, despite the tension in the air. "I'm heading home after volunteering in a flood-stricken town. I've been helping with reconstruction and aid distribution." The officer's eyes narrowed. "And you're flying first class?" he asked skeptically, glancing at her boots and worn clothes. "Yes," Linda replied calmly. "I understand how it might seem unusual, but I assure you everything is legitimate." The officer didn't respond immediately, instead signaling to a colleague. Within moments, Linda was ushered into a private screening room. She felt the weight of judgment in their gazes, but remained composed. Inside the stark room, Another officer, a younger woman with a clipboard, joined them. "We'll need to search your belongings thoroughly," she said. Linda nodded. "I understand. Please, go ahead." Her duffel bag was emptied onto the table, its contents methodically inspected. The officers sifted through her neatly folded clothes, a few personal hygiene items, and a small pouch of vitamins. The older officer held up the pouch. "What's this?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "Vitamins," Linda replied. "I bring extra for the clinics where I volunteer. They're often in short supply." The officer's skepticism was clear. "And this powder?" he asked, pointing to a small bag of laundry detergent. Linda explained patiently, "It's detergent. Supplies were limited where I was volunteering, so I always carry some with me." The younger officer glanced at her colleague, her expression a mix of doubt and curiosity. "Why would someone dressed like this buy a first-class ticket?" she muttered under her breath, though not quietly enough. Linda's heart sank at the insinuation, but she refused to let anger take root. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke gently. "I fly first class because it allows me to bring extra baggage for supplies. I don't mind spending more if it means I can help more." The room fell silent for a moment. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, but their skepticism hadn't entirely dissipated. "Ma'am," the older officer said finally, "we need to hold you for further questioning." Linda's eyes flickered with a brief sadness, but she nodded. "If that's what you need to do, I'll cooperate fully." As Linda was led out of the room and back into the terminal, she became acutely aware of the stares from other passengers. Whispers followed her every step, fueled by her conspicuous escort and the assumptions people were quick to make. She felt a pang of discomfort, but held her head high, her expression calm. The officers led Linda into another private room, this one even smaller and more intimidating than the last. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the white walls and the metal table at the center of the room. Linda sat in the lone chair, her back straight and her hands resting lightly in her lap, while the officers positioned themselves on the opposite side. "Let's start from the beginning," said the older officer, his tone gruff. "Why were you in the flood-stricken town?" Linda met his gaze steadily. "I was there to help. The flooding displaced hundreds of families, and I've been volunteering to rebuild homes and distribute supplies." The officer raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You're telling me you left your comfortable life to do manual labor for strangers?" "Yes," Linda replied simply, her voice free of defensiveness. "When you see people who've lost everything, it's hard not to act. I've been fortunate in my life, and I believe in giving back." The younger officer leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You expect us to believe that someone who looks like they've just walked out of a construction site is flying first class out of the goodness of their heart?" Linda allowed herself a small, patient smile. "I do, because it's the truth. I may not fit your image of a first-class passenger, but appearances can be deceiving." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. It was clear they weren't ready to let go of their assumptions. The younger officer pressed on, her voice growing sharper. "Can you prove any of this? Documents, photos, anything?" Linda nodded. "In my bag, you'll find a folder with letters from the families I've worked with. Some include photos of the homes we've rebuilt." The older officer retrieved the folder and opened it, flipping through its contents. His brow furrowed as he studied a photo of Linda, standing alongside a smiling family in front of a partially rebuilt home. Their gratitude was evident even through the grainy print. "These are authentic," he muttered, his tone softening slightly. The younger officer, however, remained guarded. "That doesn't explain the first-class ticket. How did you afford it?" Linda took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I save for these trips. I don't spend money on luxuries at home because I'd rather use my resources to help others. The first-class ticket isn't for comfort. It's for the extra luggage allowance. It allows me to bring supplies like vitamins, tools, and clothing." A flicker of doubt crossed the younger officer's face, but she quickly masked it. "We'll need to verify all of this with the airline. she said, standing abruptly. As the younger officer left the room, the older officer remained, his demeanor softening as he continued to review the documents. "You've done a lot of good work," he said quietly, his tone no longer accusatory. Linda's smile was kind but reserved. "Thank you. I believe everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their lives." The room fell silent as they waited for the younger officer to return. When she did, her expression was noticeably different. She carried a tablet, and on its screen was an article about Linda. The headline read, "Local Volunteer Goes Above and Beyond for Flood Victims." The accompanying photo showed Linda handing out supplies to a group of children, her face lit with genuine warmth. The younger officer looked at Linda with a mixture of embarrassment and awe. "It seems your story checks out," she admitted quietly. Linda nodded. "I'm glad you were able to verify it." Before anyone could say more, a knock sounded at the door. A third officer entered, this one with a higher rank, judging by the insignia on his uniform. He glanced at the article on the tablet and then at Linda, his expression one of growing unease. "Ms. Grayson," he began, his voice careful. "On behalf of the airport staff, I'd like to apologize for the way you've been treated today. We've made a mistake." Linda's gaze softened. "Thank you. I understand you were doing your job, but I hope this serves as a reminder to look beyond appearances." The officer nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. We'll be reviewing our procedures to ensure this doesn't happen again." Linda stood, gathering her belongings. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to the officers, her tone gentle but firm. "I hope this experience helps you see the value of treating everyone with respect. You never know what someone's story might be." The officers nodded, clearly moved by her words. As Linda exited the private screening room, she felt a wave of relief, but also a twinge of sadness. The ordeal had left its mark, not because of the inconvenience, but because of the assumptions people had made based on her appearance. She took a deep breath, resolving to let the experience fuel her commitment to fostering understanding and compassion. The terminal was bustling with activity as she made her way back to the gate. Passengers who had witnessed her earlier detainment stared at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to shame. Linda kept her head high, her steps steady. She didn't need to defend herself to strangers, but she hoped her poise would leave an impression. When she arrived at the gate, a flustered airline employee rushed to meet her. "Ms. Grayson, we are so deeply sorry for what happened earlier," the young man said, his voice brimming with regret. "Please allow us to escort you to the first-class lounge. It's the least we can do." Linda shook her head gently. "That won't be necessary. I'd prefer to wait here with the other passengers." The employee looked taken aback. "But ma'am, we insist." Linda held up a hand, her expression calm but firm. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm just like everyone else here. I'd rather stay." The employee hesitated but eventually nodded, respecting her wishes. As Linda took a seat in the waiting area, she noticed a young woman nearby whispering to her companion while gesturing subtly in her direction. Linda offered a polite smile, which seemed to fluster the pair. They quickly averted their gazes. A few moments later, a familiar face appeared. Cherry, one of the gate agents who had initially doubted Linda's first-class ticket. Cherry approached hesitantly, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Ms. Grayson," she began, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am for judging you earlier. I made assumptions, and that wasn't fair." Linda looked at her kindly, sensing the sincerity in her words. "It takes courage to admit when we're wrong," she said gently. "Thank you for your apology. I hope this experience reminds all of us to be a little more open-minded." Cherry nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "It will, I promise." Linda's compassion seemed to disarm everyone she encountered. Over the next few minutes, other airline employees approached her, each offering their own apologies. Some were awkward, others more heartfelt, but Linda accepted them all with the same gracious demeanor. When the boarding announcement was finally made, Linda stood and joined the line for first class. She noticed the glances from other passengers, some admiring, others uncertain, but she focused on the task at hand, handing her ticket to the attendant with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Grayson," the flight attendant said, her voice tinged with respect. "If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Linda replied, her tone as kind as ever. As Linda stepped onto the plane, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted noticeably. Passengers who had overheard bits of the earlier commotion now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Linda, ever humble, simply nodded politely as she made her way to her seat. Once seated, Linda took a moment to reflect. The day had been challenging, but it had also offered an opportunity for growth, not just for her, but for everyone involved. She believed in the power of moments like these to inspire change, even if only in small ways. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Linda closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of peace. She thought about the families she had worked alongside in the flood-ravaged town, their resilience and gratitude a constant source of inspiration. No matter the challenges she faced, those memories reminded her why she chose to dedicate her life to helping others. The engines roared to life and the plane lifted into the sky. Linda felt a sense of lightness, as though she were leaving behind not just the physical weight of the day, but also the emotional burden of judgment and misunderstanding. She resolved to use the experience as fuel for her mission, spreading compassion and understanding wherever she went. The flight attendant offered Linda a drink shortly after takeoff, her demeanor warm and accommodating. "Ms. Grayson, would you like a glass of champagne or perhaps sparkling water?" Linda smiled politely. "Water, please, and thank you for your kindness." As the attendant hurried to fetch her drink, Linda settled into her seat and glanced around the cabin. The atmosphere was serene, with passengers engrossed in their books, laptops, or conversations. But Linda noticed a few pairs of eyes darting her way, quickly averting when she looked back. She could feel the ripple effect of the earlier events trailing her, a faint undercurrent of curiosity and unspoken questions. Just as Linda took a sip of her water, her seatmate turned to her. He was an older man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with a demeanor that exuded authority. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but firm. "I couldn't help but overhear some of what happened back at the gate. It seems you had quite an ordeal." Linda set her glass down and nodded. "It was an unexpected experience, but I understand the concerns they had. It's important to approach situations like that with patience and understanding." The man tilted his head, intrigued. "You're remarkably composed about it all. I think most people would have been furious." "I've learned that anger doesn't solve much," Linda replied. "When people act out of prejudice or misunderstanding, meeting them with kindness can open their eyes far more effectively than confrontation ever could." The man considered her words, his expression softening. "That's quite admirable. May I ask what brought you to the airport looking so, well, ready for adventure?" Linda chuckled softly, appreciating his tactful phrasing. "I've been volunteering in a flood-stricken town. My days were spent building homes, clearing debris, and distributing supplies. My appearance is simply a reflection of the work I was doing." The man's eyes widened slightly. "That explains it. And you were flying first class?" "Yes," Linda said with a smile. "I use the extra luggage allowance to bring more supplies. It's not about luxury, it's about maximizing what I can contribute." The man leaned back in his seat, his expression one of genuine admiration. "That's incredible. It's rare to meet someone who not only talks about making a difference but actually goes out and does it." Linda shrugged modestly. "I've been fortunate in my life. I believe it's my responsibility to give back." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Linda could tell her story had left an impression on the man. When the flight attendants brought dinner service, he surprised her by asking to cover her meal choice, despite the flight being fully catered. "Please," he said with a smile, "let me do something small to honor the work you do." Linda hesitated, but eventually nodded, appreciating the gesture. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." As the flight continued, Linda reflected on how even the simplest interactions could shift perspectives. The man's respectful curiosity and willingness to listen reminded her that most people, when given the chance, were open to understanding. It was a lesson she wished more people would embrace. As the plane began its descent, Linda glanced out the window, the sprawling city below bathed in the soft glow of twilight. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, even as the weight of the day's events lingered. The flight had offered a chance for quiet reflection, and Linda resolved to carry the lessons she'd learned into her future endeavors. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, the passengers in first class began gathering their belongings. Linda moved unhurriedly, her duffel bag already slung over her shoulder by the time the doors opened. She thanked the flight attendants warmly as she disembarked, their smiles reflecting genuine respect. In the terminal, she was greeted by her friend Claire, a fellow volunteer who had come to pick her up. Claire waved enthusiastically, her face lighting up when she saw Linda. "There you are," she exclaimed, pulling Linda into a tight hug. "How was your trip back?" Linda laughed softly, her voice tinged with irony. "It was eventful, to say the least." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Eventful? That doesn't sound like you. What happened?" As they walked toward the parking garage, Linda recounted the events at the airport, describing the initial suspicion, the private screening, and the eventual apologies. Claire listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to outrage. "They treated you like that just because of how you looked?" Claire asked, her voice rising in indignation. Linda placed a calming hand on her friend's arm. "It's all right. What's important is that it led to a meaningful conversation. I think the staff learned something valuable, and so did I." Claire shook her head, still fuming. "You're a better person than I am, Linda. I'd have given them an earful." Linda smiled gently. "We all handle things differently. For me, responding with grace felt like the right choice. Hopefully, it planted a seed of change." As they reached the car, Linda felt a sense of peace settle over her. The day had been challenging, but it had also reinforced her belief in the power of kindness and understanding. She knew that even small actions could create ripples, touching lives in ways she might never fully realize. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the car providing a soothing backdrop as Linda and Claire navigated through the evening traffic. The city lights sparkled against the darkening sky, and Linda gazed out the window, her thoughts drifting back to the events of the day. Claire, sensing her friend's introspection, broke the silence. "Linda, you've always had this uncanny ability to stay calm in situations that would make anyone else lose their mind. How do you do it?" Claire asked, glancing at her briefly before focusing back on the road. Linda smiled softly, her gaze still fixed on the passing cityscape. "I suppose I've learned that reacting with anger often escalates things. And honestly, I try to think about the bigger picture. Today wasn't just about me, it was about the people I hope to inspire." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "That's a rare perspective. I mean, most people would have marched out of that airport furious." "I did feel frustrated," Linda admitted, "but I also knew that showing compassion might help the staff reflect on their actions. Maybe next time they'll treat someone else with more understanding." Claire sighed, shaking her head. "You're too good, Linda. I wish more people thought like you." Linda chuckled lightly, her tone humble. "I'm far from perfect, Claire. I just try my best, like everyone else." They reached Linda's home, a modest but cozy house tucked into a quiet neighborhood. Claire helped Linda carry her bag to the porch before pulling her into another hug. "Promise me you'll take some time to rest," Claire said, her voice warm. "You've been running yourself ragged helping everyone else." Linda smiled, touched by her friend's concern. "I will. Thank you, Claire." As Claire drove away, Linda stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the crisp night air. The familiar scent of her garden, lavender and rosemary, wafted toward her, grounding her in the comfort of home. She stepped inside, the soft glow of the living room lamp greeting her like an old friend. Linda set her duffel bag down and sank into her favorite armchair, her body finally relaxing after the long day. She glanced at the framed photos on the mantel, pictures of past volunteer trips, her family, and the community events she had organized. Each image told a story of connection, resilience, and the power of coming together. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. Linda picked it up and saw a message from an unfamiliar number. Opening it, she was surprised to find a heartfelt note from the airline's CEO. "Dear Ms. Grayson, I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received at our airport. What happened was unacceptable, and we are taking immediate steps to ensure it never happens again. I was deeply moved by your grace and your commitment to helping others. Please know that your feedback has already prompted changes within our organization. Thank you for reminding us of the importance of kindness and respect. Sincerely, Thomas Parker, CEO, Skyline Airlines." Linda stared at the message, a mix of emotions washing over her. She appreciated the apology and was heartened to know that her experience had sparked change. Still, she hoped the lessons learned would extend beyond words to meaningful actions. Her phone buzzed again, a follow-up message. "P.S. We're launching a new initiative to support humanitarian efforts. Inspired by your story, we're offering free flights to volunteers working in disaster-affected areas. We're calling it the Grayson Initiative in your honor." Linda's breath caught. She read the message twice, her heart swelling with emotion. She hadn't sought recognition, but the thought that her experience could inspire a program to help others filled her with quiet pride. The next morning, Linda woke to sunlight streaming through her window. She felt a renewed sense of purpose as she got ready for the day. With a cup of tea in hand, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop to respond to the airline CEO's message. "Dear Mr. Parker, thank you for your kind words and for taking my feedback to heart. I'm deeply touched by the creation of the Grayson Initiative. It's a testament to the power of learning from our mistakes and striving to do better. Please let me know if I can assist with the program in any way. I believe it has the potential to make a significant impact. Sincerely, Linda Grayson." After hitting send, Linda sat back and took a sip of her tea. She thought about how the day ahead would unfold. There were meetings with local organizations, phone calls with donors, and plans to coordinate for her next trip to a disaster-affected area. But today, the work felt lighter, buoyed by the knowledge that her actions were creating ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. Weeks later, Linda found herself standing on a makeshift stage at a community event, addressing a crowd gathered to celebrate the progress made in the flood-affected town. Behind her, a mural depicted scenes of rebuilding and hope, painted by local artists and volunteers. Linda adjusted the microphone and smiled at the sea of faces before her. "Today isn't about one person," she began, her voice steady and warm. "It's about what we can accomplish when we come together. Whether it's rebuilding homes, sharing a meal, or simply offering a kind word, every action matters. Every one of you here has made a difference." The crowd erupted into applause, and Linda felt a wave of gratitude. She had never sought recognition, but moments like this reminded her of the power of community. As the event wound down, a young girl approached Linda, clutching a small handmade card. "Thank you for helping us," the girl said shyly, her eyes wide with admiration. Linda knelt down to accept the card, her smile radiant. "Thank you for reminding me why I do what I do," she said softly. The card was simple, a drawing of a house with a bright sun overhead and a heart in the window. Below it were the words, "Thank you, Ms. Linda, for giving us hope." Tears pricked Linda's eyes as she hugged the girl gently. In that moment, she realized that every challenge, every judgment she had faced, was worth it for moments like these. That evening, after the community event, Linda returned to the modest home where she was staying during her time in the flood-stricken town. The house, loaned by a local family, was simple but welcoming, with handmade quilts on the bed and the faint scent of freshly baked bread lingering in the air. She set her bag down and sank into a worn armchair by the window, her body weary but her spirit full. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the partially rebuilt neighborhood, Linda opened her laptop to check her email. Her inbox was filled with messages, some from donors offering support, others from volunteers eager to join her efforts. But one subject line stood out. "Thank you from Skyline Airlines staff." Curious, Linda clicked on it. The email was from Cherry, the gate agent who had initially doubted her at the airport. "Dear Ms. Grayson, I hope this email finds you well. I've been thinking about our interaction at the airport every day since it happened. I want to thank you for your patience and grace in handling what I now realize was unfair and judgmental behavior on my part. I've learned so much from that experience, and I've shared your story with my colleagues. I also wanted to let you know that I've volunteered to be one of the first participants in the diversity and sensitivity training program our airline is implementing. Your story has inspired me to be more compassionate and to see people for who they truly are, not just how they appear. Thank you for being a beacon of kindness in what could have been a difficult moment. I'll carry the lessons you taught me for the rest of my life. Sincerely, Cherry." Linda read the email twice, a soft smile spreading across her face. It wasn't just the words that touched her. It was the thought that her actions had sparked a ripple effect, encouraging someone to reflect, grow, and make a change. She typed a thoughtful reply, expressing her gratitude for Cherry's willingness to learn and her hope that their encounter would inspire others as well. Closing her laptop, Linda leaned back in her chair and stared out the window. The quiet hum of crickets filled the evening air, a soothing reminder of the simpler moments she cherished. She thought about the challenges she had faced, not just at the airport, but throughout her journey as a volunteer. Every misunderstanding, every obstacle, every moment of judgment had led her here, to a place of purpose and connection. The next morning, Linda woke early, eager to dive back into the day's work. As she walked to the volunteer center, the sound of hammers and saws echoed in the distance, blending with the cheerful chatter of workers. The sight of progress filled her with a deep sense of satisfaction. "Good morning, Ms. Linda," called Maria, the coordinator of the volunteer efforts. The woman's face was flushed with energy as she approached, carrying a clipboard laden with notes. "I have great news. We've just received a shipment of materials thanks to a donor who heard about your story." Linda's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "That's wonderful. Who's the donor?" Maria grinned. "Skyline Airlines. They sent tools, lumber, and even some furniture for the families moving back into their homes." Linda felt a lump form in her throat. She had hoped her experience with the airline would lead to positive changes, but seeing their commitment in action was more than she had expected. "That's incredible," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "It's amazing to see how many lives their generosity will touch." Maria nodded. "Your story really seems to be inspiring people, Linda. I think it reminds everyone that even small actions can create big change." As the day wore on, Linda threw herself into the work with renewed vigor. She hauled lumber, helped install windows, and painted walls alongside volunteers from all walks of life. Each interaction reminded her of the power of collective effort. People who had never met before were now laughing, sharing stories, and working together to rebuild a community. By evening, as the sun dipped low and the last nails were hammered in place for the day, Linda stood back to admire the progress. The skeletal frames of houses that had once been ruins were now sturdy structures on their way to becoming homes. A group of children played nearby, their laughter ringing out like music. One of the children, a boy no older than 8, ran up to Linda, his face smeared with dirt and his smile wide. "Ms. Linda," he called, holding out a small flower he had picked. "This is for you." Linda crouched down to accept the flower, her heart swelling with warmth. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful." The boy beamed before running back to join his friends. Linda stood, the flower in her hand, and looked out at the community coming to life around her. Despite the hardships and challenges, moments like these reminded her why she had chosen this path. As Linda prepared to leave the town a few days later, the residents gathered to bid her farewell. They presented her with a small plaque, hand-carved from local wood, that read, "To Linda Grayson, for your kindness, dedication, and unwavering hope." Tears welled in Linda's eyes as she accepted the plaque. "This means more to me than you'll ever know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey. I'll carry your strength and resilience with me wherever I go." The crowd erupted into applause, and Linda knew in her heart that this wasn't goodbye. It was simply, "See you later." As Linda boarded the small regional plane that would take her back to the city, she carried the wooden plaque carefully in her arms, a symbol of the bonds she had forged and the work she had done. The seats were close together, and the hum of the propellers filled the cabin. Linda didn't mind. She welcomed the quiet moments to reflect. The flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes, noticed the plaque and leaned in as Linda settled into her seat. "That's beautiful," she said, her voice gentle. "Did you win an award?" Linda smiled, brushing her fingers over the engraved words. "Not exactly. It's a gift from a community I've been working with. They've been through so much, and it means everything to me." The attendant's expression softened. "You must have made quite an impact." "They made an impact on me," Linda replied. "I think that's how it always works. You give a little, and somehow you end up receiving so much more." The attendant nodded thoughtfully before excusing herself to continue her duties. Linda gazed out the window as the plane ascended, the patchwork of fields and forests below gradually giving way to endless clouds. She thought about the families she had left behind, the laughter of the children, and the resilience of the people who were rebuilding their lives. It wasn't just their strength that inspired her. It was their hope. When the plane landed in the city, Linda disembarked and made her way through the terminal. The contrast between the quiet town she had left and the bustling airport was stark, but Linda navigated it with her usual calm. She was greeted at the arrivals gate by Claire, who waved enthusiastically from behind the barrier. "There she is," Claire called as Linda approached. "How was the trip back?" Linda smiled warmly as they embraced. It was peaceful, a good time to reflect. Claire eyed the plaque Linda was holding. "And what's this? Another example of how loved you are?" Linda chuckled, her tone modest. "It's a gift from the community. They've done so much. It feels strange to be the one receiving recognition." Claire shook her head, grinning. "Linda, you've got to start accepting that you're a big deal to the people you help. Don't argue with me about it." Linda laughed softly as they headed toward the parking lot. "Fine, I'll concede this time. But only because you're stubborn." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Linda found herself juggling calls from donors, coordinating volunteer efforts, and planning her next trip to assist in another disaster-stricken region. Yet amidst the busyness, she found moments to pause and reflect on the impact of her work. One evening, as she sat in her home office drafting emails, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Skyline Airlines inviting her to attend a ceremony unveiling their new humanitarian program, the Grayson Initiative. The email explained that the program had already enabled over a dozen volunteers to travel to remote areas, bringing aid and support to communities in need. Linda hesitated. Public recognition had never been her goal. Yet she knew that her presence at the ceremony could help highlight the importance of initiatives like these. With a deep breath, she replied to the email, accepting the invitation. The day of the ceremony arrived, and Linda stood at the entrance of a grand hall, feeling slightly out of place in her simple dress amidst the formal suits and elegant gowns around her. A representative from Skyline Airlines greeted her warmly, guiding her inside. The event was filled with presentations and speeches, each speaker emphasizing the transformative power of giving back. When it was Linda's turn to take the stage, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves but steadied herself, drawing on the strength of the people who had inspired her journey. "Good evening," Linda began, her voice carrying a quiet confidence. "I'm deeply honored to be here tonight, but I want to be clear. This initiative isn't about me. It's about the power of compassion, the importance of seeing beyond ourselves, and the incredible things we can accomplish when we come together." She paused, scanning the room, her words deliberate and heartfelt. "The Grayson Initiative represents more than free flights for volunteers. It represents a commitment to creating a world where helping others is not the exception, but the rule. And it's a reminder that no act of kindness is ever too small to matter." The audience erupted into applause as Linda stepped away from the podium, her cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to the spotlight, but the response reassured her that the message had landed. After the ceremony, Linda mingled with the attendees, many of whom were volunteers who had already benefited from the program. One young woman approached her, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Ms. Grayson, I just returned from my first volunteer mission thanks to the initiative. It changed my life. Thank you for making this possible." Linda smiled, her voice soft. "Thank you for being willing to step up and help others. The world needs more people like you." As the evening wound down, Linda found herself standing near a display featuring photos of volunteers in action, building homes, distributing food, comforting children. She traced her fingers over one of the images, feeling a surge of pride for all the lives that had been touched. In the months that followed, the Grayson Initiative continued to grow, enabling countless volunteers to travel and serve in areas affected by disasters. Linda, ever humble, returned to her quiet work, preferring to focus on the people and communities she could help rather than the accolades she received. One day, as she was packing for her next trip, she paused to look at the wooden plaque sitting on her desk. It reminded her of the journey she had taken, not just the physical miles, but the emotional growth and the connections forged along the way. With a deep breath, Linda zipped up her bag and headed for the door. There was still so much work to be done, and she couldn't wait to get started. Linda adjusted the strap of her backpack as she double-checked the list of supplies she planned to bring on her next trip. This time, she was headed to a remote town in the Southwest, where devastating wildfires had left hundreds of families homeless. Despite her experience in disaster relief missions, each journey brought a mix of anticipation and responsibility that weighed on her heart. Before leaving, Linda sat down to check her emails one last time. Among the usual messages from volunteers and donors, one stood out. The subject line read, "Thank you for everything, Ms. Grayson." Intrigued, she clicked it open. The message was from a mother whose family had been helped during the flood relief project. "Dear Ms. Grayson, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you did for our community. My little daughter still talks about you every day, and not a night goes by when we don't sit in our newly rebuilt home and say a prayer of gratitude for the kindness you brought into our lives. Before the floods, we felt forgotten, like no one cared about our struggles. But your team gave us hope. You didn't just rebuild our house. You gave us a chance to rebuild our spirits. Thank you for reminding us that there are people in the world who truly care." Linda felt a lump rise in her throat as she read the heartfelt words. It was messages like these that fueled her determination and validated the long hours, hard work, and challenges she faced in her mission to help others. She replied with a simple but sincere note, promising to return to visit the community when she had the chance. The next day, Linda boarded a small plane bound for the wildfire-affected region. The flight was quiet, the hum of the engines providing a soothing backdrop for her thoughts. As she gazed out the window, she thought about how each place she visited left a unique mark on her heart. Every disaster brought immense challenges, but it also revealed the resilience and generosity of the human spirit. When she arrived, the scene was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Charred remnants of homes dotted the landscape, but amidst the ashes there was activity. Volunteers and residents working side by side to clear debris and begin rebuilding. Linda wasted no time joining the efforts, exchanging greetings with familiar faces and meeting new ones. One evening, after a long day of clearing debris and distributing supplies, Linda sat around a small campfire with a group of volunteers. The flickering flames cast warm light on their tired but smiling faces. A young volunteer, no older than 20, turned to Linda. "Ms. Grayson, can I ask you something?" he said hesitantly. "Of course," Linda replied, her voice gentle. "What's on your mind?" "You've been doing this for years," he began, "traveling to all these places, helping people rebuild their lives. Don't you ever feel overwhelmed? Like it's too much to take on?" Linda considered his question carefully before answering. "There are moments when it feels like the challenges are endless," she admitted. "But then I remember why I started. It's not about fixing everything. It's about doing what I can, even if it's just helping one family, one person at a time. Small acts of kindness can create ripples that reach further than we realize." The group sat in reflective silence for a moment before another volunteer spoke up. "Do you ever wonder if the people you've helped remember you?" Linda smiled. "It's not about them remembering me. It's about them knowing they were never alone. That someone cared enough to show up. That's what matters." The volunteers nodded, their admiration for Linda evident. Conversations around the fire shifted to lighter topics, and laughter soon replaced the somber tones of reflection. As the weeks passed, the wildfire-affected town began to show signs of recovery. Homes were being rebuilt, children returned to school, and small businesses reopened their doors. Linda found herself deeply moved by the strength and determination of the residents. One afternoon, as she helped install a roof on a family's home, the homeowner, a woman named Elena, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Grayson," Elena said softly, "I've been meaning to thank you. This house, it's more than just walls and a roof to us. It's a chance to start over. I don't know how we can ever repay you." Linda climbed down from the ladder and took Elena's hands in her own. "You don't need to repay me," she said warmly. "The way you've fought to rebuild your life, the way your family supports each other, that's repayment enough. Seeing you move forward is all I could ever ask for." Elena embraced Linda tightly, her gratitude unspoken, but deeply felt. As Linda prepared to leave the town, the residents gathered for a small farewell celebration. They presented her with a hand-carved wooden sculpture of a phoenix rising from flames, a symbol of their community's resilience. Linda accepted it with tears in her eyes, deeply moved by their thoughtfulness. "You've given us so much more than you'll ever know," one resident said during the celebration. "You reminded us that even in the darkest times, there's always hope." On her journey back home, Linda thought about the phoenix sculpture, its symbolism resonating deeply with her. Each place she visited, each person she helped, was like a phoenix, rising stronger from the ashes of adversity. She knew her work would never be done, but that realization filled her with purpose rather than dread. Back at home, Linda sat in her living room, the phoenix sculpture displayed prominently on her mantel. As she sipped a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with another email notification. It was a message from the Skyline Airlines team, updating her on the progress of the Grayson Initiative. The email detailed how the program had expanded, offering flights to volunteers heading to disaster zones across the country. It included photos of volunteers in action, rebuilding homes and comforting families. One photo caught Linda's eye. It was the young woman who had approached her at the ceremony, now standing beside a newly constructed home holding a baby in her arms. Linda's heart swelled with pride and humility. She knew that while her role had been small, the ripple effects of her actions were creating a movement that would continue long after she was gone. Setting her phone down, Linda gazed out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She thought about all the lives she had touched and the countless more she had yet to meet. With a deep breath, she resolved to keep going, one step, one act of kindness at a time. The following weeks were filled with a renewed sense of energy for Linda. She juggled preparing for her next trip with calls to donors and planning community outreach events. Yet, amidst the busyness, she began to notice something she hadn't anticipated: a growing number of people reaching out, inspired by her story. Every day brought a new message, whether from volunteers who wanted to join her efforts, students who were starting their own community initiatives, or even corporate leaders looking to support her causes. Linda was humbled by the outpouring of interest, but also slightly overwhelmed. She had always approached her work with quiet determination, avoiding the spotlight. Now she found herself thrust into a role she hadn't sought, that of a mentor and symbol of hope. One morning, Linda received an invitation that caught her attention. It was from a university hosting a panel on global humanitarian efforts. The email explained that they wanted Linda to share her experiences alongside other leaders in the field, believing her perspective could inspire the next generation of changemakers. Linda hesitated. Public speaking had never been her strength. She preferred the hands-on work of rebuilding homes or distributing supplies to standing on a stage, but the thought of reaching students, young people eager to make a difference, resonated with her. She called Claire for advice. "What do you think?" Linda asked. "Do I belong on a stage like that?" Claire's laughter rang through the phone. "Linda, are you kidding me? You've done more to change lives than most people could dream of. If anyone belongs on that stage, it's you." Linda smiled, despite her nerves. "I guess I could give it a try. If it helps even one person decide to step up and help others, it'll be worth it." The day of the panel arrived, and Linda stood backstage, smoothing the fabric of her simple dress as she waited for her turn to speak. The auditorium was packed, filled with students, faculty, and community members eager to hear from the speakers. When Linda's name was called, she stepped onto the stage to polite applause. Taking her place at the podium, she gripped the edges for a moment, steadying herself before she began. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice calm but purposeful. "I'm here today to share a story, not about me, but about the incredible strength of the human spirit." She began by describing her journey into humanitarian work, the flood-ravaged town, the wildfire recovery efforts, and the countless communities she had visited over the years. She spoke not of her accomplishments, but of the resilience and determination she had witnessed in the people she served. "I've seen families rebuild their lives from the ground up," Linda said, her voice growing more confident. "I've seen strangers become neighbors, united by the shared goal of hope. And I've learned that even the smallest acts of kindness, a meal shared, a hand offered, can create ripples that change lives." She paused, looking out at the audience. "I want to leave you with this. You don't have to travel across the world to make a difference. You don't need to have money or special skills. All you need is the willingness to show up and care. The rest will follow." The applause that erupted was thunderous, echoing in the vast auditorium. Linda felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her as she stepped back from the podium. After the panel, a line of students formed, each eager to speak with Linda. One young woman, her face lit with determination, stepped forward. "Ms. Grayson, I just wanted to thank you for your words. I've been struggling to figure out how I can make a difference, and you made me realize I don't have to wait for the perfect opportunity. I can start small." Linda placed a reassuring hand on the student's shoulder. "That's exactly right. Start where you are. You'll be amazed at how far even a small effort can go." Another student approached, clutching a notebook filled with notes. "I've been thinking about organizing a local cleanup event in my neighborhood," he said nervously. "Do you think something that small would even matter?" Linda's smile was warm. "Absolutely. Every effort matters. You're not just cleaning up a park or a street. You're showing people that someone cares. That inspires others to care too." The impact of the panel extended far beyond that day. Linda began receiving updates from the students she had spoken to, photos of community gardens they had started, stories of food drives they had organized, and even videos of neighborhood volunteer days. Each message reaffirmed Linda's belief in the power of planting seeds of kindness. One evening, as Linda was sifting through these updates, she received a call from a woman whose name she didn't immediately recognize. "Ms. Grayson," the woman began, her voice emotional. "I'm calling from Skyline Airlines. I was one of the staff members who interacted with you during that incident at the airport." Linda's breath caught, and she leaned forward in her chair. "Yes, I remember," she said softly. The woman hesitated before continuing. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your grace and understanding that day, it changed me. I've been volunteering at a local shelter ever since, and it's become one of the most meaningful parts of my life." Linda felt her chest tighten with emotion. "That means so much to me," she said sincerely. "Thank you for sharing that. It's wonderful to hear how you found a way to make a difference." The call stayed with Linda for days. It reminded her of how even the most challenging moments could become opportunities for transformation, not just for herself, but for others. She thought back to the people she had met, the connections she had forged, and the communities she had helped rebuild. Each story, each small ripple of change, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as Linda prepared for her next journey, her heart felt full. She knew the work ahead would be hard, but she also knew it would be worth every step.